Handsome millionaire becomes a poor taxi driver to discover true love. Before we begin the story, please leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Luke, a billionaire surrounded by luxury, realized that despite his wealth, he was lonely. Women only cared about his money, not him as a person. Frustrated with the fakeness of his life, he came up with a bold plan. He would pretend to be a poor taxi driver. Luke bought an old, run-down taxi, dressed in plain clothes, and hit the streets hoping to find someone who would love him for who he truly was, not his money. On his first day as a taxi driver, Luke felt invisible to everyone, but everything changed when he picked up a woman named Maria. She didn't ask about his wealth or flirt with him. She simply treated him like a person. This brief encounter sparked something in Luke. For the first time, he felt like someone truly saw him. As he drove away that evening, he knew he had made the right decision. He wasn't just looking for love anymore. He was searching for something deeper, genuine connection. This was only the beginning of Luke's journey, and he hoped tomorrow would bring him closer to finding the love he had been missing all along. The next day, as the sun rose over the city, Luke found himself once again behind the wheel of his aging yellow taxi. The streets were buzzing with life, but he was just another face in the crowd, driving people from one destination to the next. It felt strange, like a life he had never imagined for himself. Yet it also brought him a sense of freedom he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, no one was looking at him with expectations. They weren't judging him by the size of his bank account or the brands he wore. He picked up a few passengers, exchanged brief pleasantries, and dropped them off. But no one stood out. No one truly connected with him. It wasn't that they were rude or unpleasant. They were just indifferent. Luke felt invisible again. His heart sank a little. Was this really the way to find love? He thought. Am I just destined to be a nobody, always on the outside looking in? Then, as if fate was about to intervene, he pulled up at a quiet street corner near the park, the soft glow of the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. And there she was, Maria. He had seen her before. Not in person, but he'd noticed her once, walking past the cafe on the corner when he had been driving. Her bright smile, her effortless grace, and the way she moved through the crowd with quiet confidence had caught his eye. He had told himself he'd never see someone like her in his world. She was too real, too untouched by the glamour and superficiality that surrounded him. Now, here she was, standing alone on the curb, her eyes scanning the street as if she were waiting for something. Maybe it was destiny, or maybe it was just coincidence, but Luke couldn't ignore the pull to stop. He slowed the taxi, rolled down the window, and called out, "Need a ride?" Maria looked up, her gaze meeting his for the first time. There was a moment of hesitation in her eyes. Maybe she had already been picked up by someone else, or maybe she was just sizing him up. But then she smiled, and Luke felt his heart skip a beat. It was warm and genuine, not forced or polite, just a real smile. The kind of smile that made you feel like you had known someone forever, even if it was the first time you'd met. She walked up to the cab, pulled open the door, and slid inside. "Just a few blocks over," she said simply, settling in. Luke's hands gripped the wheel a little tighter as he pulled back into traffic. His mind raced. What is it about her? Why does it feel so different? He had picked up hundreds of passengers over the years, but none of them had made him feel this intrigued. Maria didn't immediately start talking. There was a calmness to her presence, an easy silence that hung in the air between them. Luke didn't know whether to be relieved or disappointed. He had expected her to fill the quiet with small talk, to make things comfortable, as most people did. But Maria didn't. She just sat there, looking out the window, occasionally glancing back at him with an expression that seemed curious, yet kind. For a moment, Luke thought about breaking the silence. He wanted to say something, anything, to keep the conversation flowing, but something stopped him. He realized that he didn't need to fill every moment with words. He was just present with her. Then, as if on cue, Maria turned to him and asked, "How's your day going?" Her voice was soft, but there was something about it, something real. It wasn't the usual question people ask out of politeness. It was genuine. She actually wanted to know. Luke felt a jolt of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Connection. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "It's been quiet," he said, glancing at her. "Nothing exciting. How about you?" Maria smiled again, this time with a hint of amusement. "Same. Life's pretty simple, I guess. Sometimes that's a good thing." Her answer caught Luke off guard. It was so different from what he was used to hearing. Most people, especially in his world, always had something grand to say, something impressive, something that showed off their success or status. But Maria, she spoke plainly, without any need to boast or impress. She seemed perfectly comfortable in her own skin, in a way that Luke envied. They didn't speak much more after that, but the silence didn't feel awkward. It was comfortable. It was peaceful. When they arrived at her destination, she handed him the fare and looked up at him with a kind expression. "Thanks for the ride," she said, a softness to her voice that made his chest tighten. Luke's heart raced for a moment. She was about to leave, and for some reason, he didn't want her to. He had barely spoken to her, and yet it felt like they had shared something deeper than words. As she stepped out of the cab, he called out to her, almost without thinking, "Hey, Maria, it was really nice talking to you." She paused, turning back toward him, her smile wide and genuine. "It was nice talking to you too, Luke." The way she said his name felt personal, real. She didn't see him as a rich man, a taxi driver, or anything other than Luke, and that was more than he could ask for in that moment. As she walked away, Luke sat there for a moment, stunned by the brief encounter. What was that? He wondered. Why do I feel like I've just met someone who actually sees me? For the first time in a long time, he felt something stir inside him. Hope. He wasn't sure where it would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. Maria wasn't like anyone else. And maybe, just maybe, she was the one he had been waiting for all along. As he drove away, Luke's thoughts raced. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way she had made him feel like he wasn't just a man in a taxi, but someone worth talking to. The simple conversation they'd shared lingered in his mind, and for the first time in years, he had hope that love could be real. He wasn't just pretending to be someone else. For the first time, he felt like he had met someone who would love him for the real him. He drove on, feeling a rush of excitement. This could be the start of something incredible, and he couldn't wait to see where it would go. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind of emotions for Luke. He couldn't get Maria out of his mind. The way she spoke to him, the way she treated him like an ordinary person, it was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. He had never been this captivated by someone, and yet he found himself hesitating. Was it real? He thought about their brief conversation in the cab. She hadn't asked about his wealth, hadn't made any attempt to flatter him or pry into his life. It was refreshing, but Luke couldn't help but wonder if it was too good to be true. Was Maria really as genuine as she seemed? Or was she just another person who, in time, would discover the man behind the taxi driver and be driven by his money? As the days went on, Luke wrestled with his thoughts. The lingering doubt began to gnaw at him. He had been living in disguise for a reason, but now he was beginning to feel like he was testing fate. What if Maria wasn't like the others? What if she really did like him for who he was? Luke knew he couldn't take any chances. He needed to find out once and for all. He had to test her. It wasn't long before Maria called him again. This time she was headed to the same park they had passed on that first ride. Luke's heart fluttered when he saw her walking down the sidewalk, her stride confident yet effortless, as if she belonged in the world Luke had so desperately wanted to escape. When she climbed into the cab, she greeted him with a warm smile. "How's your day been?" she asked, as usual, not out of habit but genuine interest. Luke smiled back, but this time there was a hint of tension in his voice. "It's been all right," he replied, keeping his tone casual. He wasn't sure how to begin, but the question he had been itching to ask had been weighing heavily on his mind. "But you know, being a taxi driver isn't as glamorous as people think. I don't really make much." Maria turned to look at him, her expression kind and patient. "I'm sure it's hard work," she said softly, "but you seem to manage." Luke hesitated. This was his chance to push further. "It's not easy. Some days it feels like I'm just scraping by. The bills keep coming, but there's never enough money to really live. You know what I mean?" His voice sounded more defeated than he meant for it to. For a moment, Maria didn't say anything. She seemed to be considering his words carefully. Finally, she responded, her voice calm and steady. "I get it," she said. "Life isn't always easy, but you're doing your best, right? That's all that matters." Luke felt a pang of relief. She's not judging me. She's not turning away. But there was still a part of him that remained cautious. He wanted to see how far he could push it. What if she's just being nice? What if she's only pretending? He decided to take it one step further. "Yeah, well, it's tough sometimes. I don't know. Maybe it would be easier if I had more money, you know?" He glanced at her, gauging her reaction. Maria's eyes softened, but there was no change in her demeanor. She didn't flinch. She didn't seem shocked by his admission. "Money isn't everything, Luke," she said, her voice steady, with a touch of wisdom in it. "It can make things easier, sure, but at the end of the day, it doesn't define us. It doesn't determine whether we're happy." Her words struck him harder than he expected. For a moment, he wasn't sure how to respond. He had expected something else, something that would give him a clue about her intentions. Maybe a sign that she had an ulterior motive, that she was only in it for what he could offer. But no, Maria's reply was different. It was genuine. It wasn't about his money. It wasn't about what he could give her. She cared about him as a person, not as a rich man or a poor taxi driver. The rest of the ride passed in a comfortable silence. When they reached her destination, she once again handed him the fare. Luke barely noticed as she paid him. His mind was still reeling from the conversation. But then, as Maria started to open the door, she paused and turned back to him. "You know, Luke," she said, "I really admire how hard you work. I don't think it matters what you do or how much money you have. What matters is the kind of person you are." Her smile was kind, warm, and completely genuine. Luke couldn't help but feel a rush of gratitude. She wasn't just saying the right things. She was acting on them. She was showing him, through her words and her actions, that she cared for him, not his wealth. It was more than he had ever hoped for. "Thank you, Maria," Luke said quietly. His voice felt thick, caught between the flood of emotions he was feeling and the desire to keep his composure. "You have no idea how much that means to me." She smiled, as if she understood exactly what he was saying. "Take care, Luke. I'll see you around." As he watched her walk away, Luke sat there for a moment, letting everything sink in. The test he had set up for Maria hadn't been necessary. She had passed it without even knowing it. She hadn't reacted the way he expected. She hadn't shown any interest in his money, in his past, or in what he could offer her. She had simply cared for him, for the person he was in that moment. Luke felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The walls he had built around himself were beginning to crumble. Maria wasn't like the others. She didn't want his money. She wanted him. And for the first time, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he could find love after all. Not the kind of love that came with strings attached, but the kind that was pure, real, and untainted by materialism. He sat there in the driver's seat for a while longer, the weight of everything settling in. He didn't need to pretend anymore. He didn't need to be someone else. Maria had shown him that love could be real, even for someone like him. As he drove off into the evening, the city lights flickering around him, Luke couldn't help but smile. He had taken a chance, and it had paid off. He wasn't alone anymore. For the first time, he felt like he had finally found something worth fighting for. And this time, he wasn't going to let it slip away. The days after their last conversation were a blur for Luke. Each time Maria called for a ride, each time they exchanged words, it felt like he was falling deeper into something he had never expected. Their connection was undeniable, yet something in the back of his mind held him back. Luke had always prided himself on being in control of his life, but with Maria, he felt vulnerable in a way he had never experienced before. She was different. She was real. The taxi rides had become more than just daily routines. They were moments Luke looked forward to, where he could forget about his billionaire status and simply be himself. Maria's warmth and kindness had slowly chipped away at the walls he had spent years building. It wasn't just that she didn't care about his wealth. She genuinely liked him for who he was. And for the first time, Luke began to wonder if that was enough. Could it be that he had finally found love without needing to hide behind the mask of his money? But there was still a nagging question in his mind. What if she finds out who I really am? What if she doesn't love me anymore when she realizes the truth? It was on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when Luke realized he couldn't wait any longer. They had shared countless conversations, but there was always this unspoken thing between them. The secret of his wealth hung in the air like a cloud, and it was time to clear it. He couldn't keep living this lie. He had to be honest with her. Maria had called him again, and this time, she asked him to meet her at a small cafe near the city park. As he pulled up in front of the cafe, his heart was pounding in his chest. He glanced at himself in the rearview mirror, taking in his simple clothes and worn-out taxi. There was no way to prepare for what he was about to do. He didn't know how she would react. He didn't know if she would even understand. Maria was already waiting for him when he walked in, sitting at a corner table, her smile as warm as ever. She looked up at him, and for a moment, everything felt perfect, as if nothing could go wrong. "Hi, Luke," she said softly, her voice filled with that familiar, easy warmth. "I'm glad you came." He sat down across from her, unsure of how to begin. He opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. The weight of the moment felt too heavy, too real. But Maria, ever perceptive, noticed the tension in his posture. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her brow furrowing with concern. Luke took a deep breath, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Something important." Maria's expression softened. "You can tell me anything. You know that, right?" Luke nodded, swallowing hard. This was it. There was no going back now. His voice a little firmer now. "I'm not just a taxi driver. I'm not who I said I was. I've been pretending." Her face didn't change, but Luke could see the curiosity in her eyes, the subtle shift in her posture as she leaned in slightly. "I'm not just some guy who drives a cab to make ends meet. The truth is, I'm a billionaire. I've been hiding it from you this whole time because I didn't want you to care about that. I didn't want you to love me for my money, but for who I really am." For a long moment, there was silence between them. Luke held his breath, waiting for her reaction. He had no idea what to expect. Would she be angry? Would she feel betrayed? Maria just sat there, her eyes studying him with an expression that was hard to read. He saw her take in a deep breath. But instead of the anger or disappointment he feared, she simply smiled. A smile that reached her eyes. "I already knew," she said, her voice calm and steady. Luke blinked, stunned. "You knew?" "Yeah," Maria replied, nodding. "It wasn't hard to figure out. The way you carry yourself, the way people treat you when we're out together, the way you never talk about money. It all added up. But I didn't care. I didn't need to know because I liked you, Luke. I liked you for you. Not for what you had, but for who you are." Luke felt his heart race, the relief washing over him in waves. She wasn't angry. She wasn't disappointed. She was understanding. "But why didn't you tell me?" Maria asked, her voice gentle but curious. "I didn't want to lose you," Luke admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "I thought that if you knew who I really was, you'd only be interested in my money. I wanted to be with someone who loved me, not my wealth. I thought maybe if I pretended to be someone else, I'd find out if love was real." Maria leaned back in her chair, her eyes softening as she listened. "Luke, I'm glad you told me. I think it's brave, honestly. But I already knew the most important thing, that you're kind and genuine, and you make me feel seen. That's what matters to me." Luke felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt completely seen, completely understood. Maria wasn't focused on his status or his wealth. She loved him for who he was, not for what he could give her. The next few minutes passed in an easy silence as the realization sank in. Maria hadn't been deceived by his wealth, nor had she been interested in his money. She had liked him for everything he was, the man who had been willing to strip away his wealth, his title, and live as a regular person to find out if love could be real. Luke couldn't help but smile. There was a sense of peace inside him now, a peace he hadn't known in years. "Thank you, Maria," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You've no idea how much that means to me." She reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "I think I have a pretty good idea." And in that moment, Luke knew. He had found something rare, something real. He had found love. Not the kind of love that came with strings attached, but the kind that had no price, no expectations, just two people who saw each other for who they truly were. He was no longer hiding behind a mask. For the first time, Luke could truly be himself. And Maria had loved him not because of his wealth, but because of the man he was. As they sat there, holding hands, Luke realized that this was the beginning of something extraordinary. It wasn't just about love. It was about honesty, vulnerability, and the kind of connection that transcended everything else. This was the real love he had been searching for. And now that the truth was out, there was no turning back. The days after their conversation were a whirlwind for Luke. He felt lighter, freer than he had in years. And with Maria by his side, everything seemed to fall into place. For the first time in his life, he was living without a mask. He no longer had to hide behind the facade of his wealth, pretending to be someone he wasn't. He had found love, the kind of love he had been searching for all along, and he didn't care who knew it. But there was one thing Luke knew, deep down, that he couldn't ignore. His family. The moment had come when he would have to face them, tell them the truth and confront the consequences of his choices. He knew how they would react. His parents had always been a force to be reckoned with, powerful, wealthy, and above all, insistent that he marry someone of their choosing. They had their plans for him, and none of those plans involved Maria. The thought of confronting them sent a knot of anxiety into Luke's stomach. He could already hear his father's voice, cold and commanding. He could see his mother's disappointed gaze, her eyes filled with judgment. They wouldn't understand. But he couldn't hide it any longer. One evening, as Luke sat in the dimly lit study of his mansion, he received a call from his mother. Her voice was sharp and expectant as always, but this time there was something else in it. Something Luke couldn't quite place. "Luke," she began, her tone authoritative. "We need to talk. It's about your choices." Luke clenched his jaw. He had known this was coming. He had known they would try to control him, to manipulate him into conforming to their vision of who he should be. But this time, he wasn't going to back down. Not for his wealth. Not for his family, and certainly not for their expectations. "I'm coming over," he replied, his voice steady but resolute. When Luke arrived at his family's mansion, it felt like stepping into another world. The vast marble floors, the grand chandeliers, the artwork that lined the walls, all of it was designed to remind him of his place in the world. A place that, for the first time, no longer felt like home. His parents were already waiting for him in the grand living room. His father, a tall, imposing figure with sharp features, was seated behind a desk that was more like a throne in the center of the room. His mother stood near the window, her back to him, gazing out over the perfectly manicured gardens as if she was waiting for the storm to pass. "Sit down, Luke," his father commanded, his voice as cold as ever. Luke took a seat, his heart pounding in his chest. He had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to back down this time. "Son," his father began, his voice calm but dripping with authority, "we've heard about this woman you've been spending time with. We need to talk about her. About your future." Luke felt a flash of anger surge through him, but he kept his voice calm. "I don't think there's anything to discuss. Maria is the woman I love, and that's the end of it." His father's eyes narrowed. "Love? You're talking about a woman who doesn't even come close to matching our status. Do you think she'll fit into our world? Do you think she understands the responsibilities you have? She's not someone we can have as part of this family, Luke." Luke's mother finally turned around, her face betraying nothing but the cold disappointment she had shown him his entire life. "She's from a poor background, Luke," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "She doesn't belong here. She won't know how to navigate this world. How will she manage the expectations of our family? How will she keep up with the image we've built?" Luke's heart clenched. He knew this was coming, but hearing them speak about Maria in such a way made him feel sick. His love for her, for everything she represented, made him want to shout, to argue, but he remained composed. "Maria isn't about status," Luke said, his voice rising just a little with the passion he felt. "She's kind, she's strong, and she's honest. She loves me for who I am, not for what I have. That's all that matters to me." His father stood up abruptly, his voice suddenly sharp and commanding. "You are the heir to a vast fortune, Luke. You don't get to make decisions like this. You are a part of this family, and everything you do reflects on us. We can't afford to let you throw it all away for someone who doesn't even understand what's at stake. We've arranged for you to marry someone who will help us continue our legacy, someone who can handle the pressure of our name. This woman is not the one." Luke's eyes burned with fury. "I don't care about the legacy. I don't care about the name. I care about Maria. She's the only one who's ever cared about me for who I am, not for what I can give her. You'll never understand that. But it doesn't matter anymore." His father's expression turned dark, and for a moment, the room was silent. His mother's voice broke the tension, but her words were filled with finality. "If you choose her, Luke, you choose to leave everything behind. You choose to turn your back on everything we've worked for. You won't be welcome here anymore. You'll lose your place in the company, your inheritance, everything." Luke's heart sank, but he knew what he had to do. The price of love, the price of being true to himself, was high, but he had already made his choice. "Then I'll leave. I don't need your money. I don't need your company. All I need is Maria. His mother's face twisted in anger, and his father's gaze hardened. They had never been good at understanding love, at least not the kind that didn't come with a price tag. You'll regret this, Luke, his father said, his voice low and dangerous. Luke stood up, his voice firm. I won't. I've already made my decision. I'm going to be with Maria, and nothing you say will change that. The next few days were a blur. Luke knew his parents would never accept his choice, but the weight of their rejection still stung. He had always been their golden child, the heir to their empire, and now he had thrown it all away for a woman who had nothing. But as he walked out of his family's mansion, leaving behind everything they had built for him, Luke didn't feel regret. He felt relief. He was free. Maria had always seen him for who he truly was, and that was more than enough. The showdown with his family had only solidified his resolve. He was done pretending to be someone else. He was done trying to live up to expectations that weren't his own. Now, it was time to live for him, and for Maria. Luke stood at the threshold of his old life, staring at the mansion behind him, the place where he had spent so many years chasing success, prestige, and wealth. It had once felt like home, a symbol of everything he had worked for, but now it felt like a prison. He could feel the weight of his parents' words hanging in the air, their final judgment echoing in his mind. You'll regret this, Luke. But for the first time, those words didn't faze him. His heart was clear. He had chosen Maria, and in doing so, he had chosen a new path, one that had nothing to do with money or status, but everything to do with love, honesty, and finding peace within himself. The first few days without the security of wealth were like a strange dream. Luke woke up in an unfamiliar apartment, small, modest, with nothing but the essentials. It was starkly different from the life he had known, and yet it felt more real. The sound of the city outside his window, the rush of cars, the hum of people going about their day. It felt like he was finally a part of something bigger than the world he had been confined to. The world of money, status, and endless luxury had been a cocoon, but now he was free. Maria was there beside him, as calm and steady as ever. She had never expected a life of riches. She had always lived with what she needed, finding joy in the little things. She hadn't been fazed by Luke's decision to leave everything behind, and that only made him love her more. She was the anchor he needed, and together, they would face whatever came next. But there were moments when the weight of their new life would settle in on Luke's shoulders. The money was gone, and with it, the safety net he had once taken for granted. He no longer had a chauffeur to drive him around or a personal assistant to handle every detail of his day. Instead, he was up at 6 a.m., making his own breakfast, doing his own laundry, and driving himself to his new job, a far cry from the life he had once lived. Luke had found a small tech startup that was hiring. It wasn't the glamorous CEO position he was used to, but it felt like a start. The work was challenging and rewarding, but every day there were reminders that this life was different. He no longer had the power to make snap decisions or influence the world around him with a single phone call. Now, he had to work for everything. But despite the hard work, Luke couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. It wasn't about the size of his paycheck or the prestige of his position. It was about the satisfaction of knowing he had earned it all on his own. He wasn't just Luke the billionaire anymore. He was Luke the man who had built a new life from scratch, who had made a choice and stuck with it. Maria, too, had made sacrifices. She was used to a simpler life, but even she couldn't deny that some of the adjustments were harder than she'd expected. They had once been able to go out to fancy restaurants, buy anything they wanted without thinking twice. Now they carefully budgeted their expenses, often cooking meals at home instead of dining out. The small luxuries they had once taken for granted, weekend getaways, designer clothes, and spontaneous shopping sprees, were no longer a part of their reality. Yet, Maria never complained. She adjusted with grace, seeing the beauty in their new life. She had always believed that happiness wasn't found in material things. And now, with Luke, she felt more content than ever. They walked together through the city streets, hand in hand, with nothing but the simple joy of being in each other's company. But there were moments when doubts crept in. Luke would come home from work, exhausted, his hands sore from hours spent typing at a desk, and Maria would notice the strain on his face. He was learning how to live without wealth, and it wasn't easy. The luxury he had once enjoyed was now a distant memory, and the reality of their situation could sometimes feel overwhelming. One evening, after a long day at work, Luke slumped onto the couch, his body aching. Maria sat down next to him, her hand gently resting on his. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "You're doing great, Luke," she said softly, her voice reassuring. "I'm proud of you. We're doing this together." Luke sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I don't know, Maria. Some days, it feels like I'm drowning in it all. The work is harder, the money is less. I'm not sure if this was the right decision." Maria turned to face him, her eyes full of understanding. "We didn't choose this life because it would be easy, Luke. We chose it because we want something real. And that's what we have. We're building our life from the ground up. It's not going to be perfect, but it's ours." Luke looked at her, and in that moment, he realized how much he had changed. The money, the luxury, the status, it had never truly made him happy. It had been a distraction, a mask he had worn to hide from the reality of who he was. Now, without those things, he was more himself than he had ever been. He smiled at Maria, his heart swelling with gratitude. "You're right," he said softly. "We have something real, and that's all that matters." As the weeks passed, Luke and Maria found a rhythm in their new life. It wasn't always easy. There were days when they had to scrape by, when the pressures of living without wealth felt heavy. But they had each other, and that made all the difference. Luke had learned that true happiness wasn't found in a bank account or a title. It was found in the simple moments of life, in the love they shared, and in the peace they had built together. One afternoon, after finishing a long day of work, Luke walked with Maria to their favorite park. The air was crisp, and the sky was painted with shades of orange and pink as the sun set. They sat on a bench, watching the world go by, their fingers intertwined. "I think I'm starting to get it," Luke said, looking out at the city around them. "I thought I needed all the money, all the power to be happy. But now I see that all I really need is this. You, me, our life together." "That's the real wealth," Maria smiled, her eyes shining. "Exactly," she said softly. "It's not about what you have. It's about who you're with, and we're richer than anyone I know." Luke leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. For the first time in his life, he felt truly at peace. He wasn't chasing after something anymore. He had found what he had been searching for all along: real love, real happiness, and a life that was truly his own. And that, Luke realized, was worth more than all the wealth in the world. The days without his family's influence had been both liberating and difficult. Luke had grown accustomed to a life that was simple, honest, and real. But there was always a part of him, deep down, that knew he couldn't completely escape his past. The lavish mansion, the family name, the expectations, all of it was a part of who he was. And as much as he had rejected their world, it was impossible to fully erase it. It had been weeks since the confrontation with his parents, weeks since he had walked away from everything they had built for him. His heart was light with Maria by his side, but the weight of his decision to sever ties with his family lingered in the back of his mind. He hadn't spoken to them since that fateful day when they had condemned his choice of love. The phone calls had stopped, the emails ignored, and the walls between them had grown thick with silence. But then one evening, as he sat at the small kitchen table with Maria, the phone rang. Luke glanced at the screen, his heart skipping a beat when he saw his father's name flashing on the display. The call he had dreaded, the call he had feared for weeks, was finally here. His father had reached out. "Are you going to answer it?" Maria asked, noticing the sudden change in Luke's expression. Luke hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. He hadn't prepared himself for this. He didn't know what his father wanted or what he was going to say, but he knew that avoiding it wouldn't solve anything. With a deep breath, he pressed the green button and raised the phone to his ear. "Luke," his father's voice came through, cold and firm as ever. "We need to talk." There it was, the moment of reckoning. "What is it, Dad?" Luke said, his voice steady but laced with tension. "You've made your feelings clear." "Not over the phone," his father replied, his tone suddenly more serious. "We need to speak in person. I'm willing to discuss things, if you're willing to listen." Luke exchanged a look with Maria, who nodded slightly, silently offering her support. "All right," he said, his voice unwavering. "I'll come by tomorrow." The next day, Luke drove to the grand estate, the place that had once been his home. The imposing gates, the grand pillars at the entrance, the perfectly manicured gardens, they all felt alien to him now. It was like walking into a different world, one that no longer belonged to him. But his footsteps were resolute as he made his way to the front door, his heart pounding in his chest. He was greeted by a butler who led him inside, past the marble floors and golden chandeliers. Every inch of the mansion felt like a reminder of the life he had chosen to leave behind. When he reached the sitting room, his father was already waiting, seated in a leather chair, his hands folded in front of him. His mother stood near the window, her expression unreadable. "Luke," his father began as he stood up to greet him. "Thank you for coming." Luke took a deep breath and nodded. "Let's get this over with." His father's expression softened slightly. "I never wanted it to come to this. I never wanted to lose you, son. But you've made your choices. We've all made mistakes." Luke felt a flicker of hope. Could this be an olive branch? Was his father finally willing to accept him for the man he had become, for the life he had chosen? "I've had time to think about things," his father continued, his voice quieter now. "And I realize I may have been too harsh. You've chosen a different path, and that's your right. But the truth is, your mother and I, we want you to be happy, and we want to make things right." Luke felt a mixture of disbelief and caution. Had his father really changed? Was this an apology, or was there another motive behind his words? He glanced at Maria, who stood by his side, offering silent encouragement. "I don't know if you'll ever truly understand my choices," Luke said, his voice steady. "But I had to do what felt right for me. I couldn't keep living a life based on your expectations. I couldn't be the person you wanted me to be." His father's eyes flickered with something, regret perhaps or fear, but he nodded. "I understand. I didn't want to see it at first, but I do now. We're not asking you to give up, Maria, or go back to the life you left. But we miss you, Luke. And the truth is, your place in this family, in this world, will always be here. There's no shame in coming back." The silence in the room was heavy. Luke stood there, feeling the weight of his father's words. He could see the cracks in the facade, the vulnerability that had always been hidden behind the polished image of his father. For the first time, Luke saw a man who was not just the head of an empire, but a father who wanted to make amends. But that didn't change the reality of his situation. Luke wasn't the same person he had been when he left. He had shed the layers of privilege and power. He had built a life with Maria that had nothing to do with money or status. "Thank you," Luke said quietly, his voice full of emotion. "But I can't go back. Not to the way things were. His father looked at him, the weight of his disappointment hanging in the air. "You've made your choice, son. But know this, whatever happens, you're always welcome here. Your mother and I, we love you." Luke's chest tightened, but he stood firm. "I love you too, Dad. But I've found something here. Something real, and I'm not willing to give that up." As Luke turned to leave, he felt a sense of finality. He had done what he came to do. He had faced his parents, had confronted the past, and had made peace with it. They might never understand his decision to leave the world they had carefully built for him, but it didn't matter. He had made his choice, and it had been the right one. Outside, the air felt fresh and clean. Maria stood waiting for him, her eyes filled with quiet strength and understanding. Luke walked over to her, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "They're not going to change, are they?" Maria asked softly, her voice tinged with sadness. Luke shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "No. But I'm okay with that. They have their world, and I have mine. And now, I have you." Maria smiled, and for the first time Luke felt the full weight of the life he had chosen. The good, the hard, and the beautiful. It wasn't always easy, but it was real, and that was enough. They walked hand in hand into their new life, ready to face whatever came next, together. The days after his return to his family's mansion were filled with a strange calmness, a peace that Luke hadn't expected. The tension with his parents had finally eased, and although there was still a distance between them, it was different. His father had expressed his regrets, his mother had softened her stance, and for the first time in a long while, Luke felt that the door to reconciliation, though still ajar, had closed behind him for good. He had made his choice. Maria was his future, and nothing, not even the weight of family legacy, could change that. But life had a way of throwing curveballs, and Luke's peaceful new life was about to be shattered in the most unexpected of ways. It was one Thursday evening when everything changed. Luke had just finished a long day of work at the startup and was looking forward to a quiet dinner with Maria. He'd grown accustomed to their simple routine, cooking together, sharing stories about their day, and enjoying each other's company without the distractions of wealth or expectation. As he walked into their small apartment, he was greeted by the smell of roasted vegetables and the soft hum of Maria humming her favorite song in the kitchen. But as he dropped his bag on the couch, he noticed something strange. A letter. It lay on the coffee table, its envelope pristine and formal, with the unmistakable logo of his family's company stamped on it. His heart skipped a beat. He hadn't heard from his family since that fateful day when he'd walked away. He hadn't expected to either. The letter felt out of place, like an unwelcome visitor in the life he had built with Maria. "Maria," Luke called softly, a hint of unease creeping into his voice. She poked her head out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What's up?" He gestured to the letter. "This is from my family." Maria's eyes widened in surprise. She walked over, and together, they both stared at the envelope. Luke's fingers trembled slightly as he opened it, unfolding the paper inside. His eyes scanned the words quickly, and then he froze. "Dear Luke, we hope this letter finds you well. While we respect your decisions, there is something of great importance that you need to know. We believe that it is our duty to inform you, as it concerns the future of the family, and perhaps your own." Luke's pulse quickened, his gaze darting back and forth as his brain tried to make sense of the cryptic words. But then, as he read further, the true shock hit him like a freight train. Maria, as we have come to learn, is not just any woman you've chosen to be with. She is carrying your child. You are going to be a father, Luke. And while you may have thought that walking away from your legacy would leave you free from responsibility, it is our belief that your child should not have to suffer the consequences of your choices. We insist that you return to the family, where we can discuss what this means for your future and the future of your child." The letter was signed by his father. Luke felt the room spinning. He read the words again, slower this time, trying to digest the reality of what he had just read. Maria was pregnant. He was going to be a father. The words blurred together, and his mind raced, trying to process the sudden and shocking revelation. Maria, standing silently beside him, had seen the color drain from his face. Her eyes searched his face, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "Luke, what's wrong? What's in the letter?" With trembling hands, Luke handed her the paper. She read it quietly, her face growing pale as she absorbed the words. I didn't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't think they would find out like this." Luke shook his head in disbelief. "Neither did I. I didn't even know until now. I never imagined they'd use something like this to try and manipulate me back into their world." He ran his hands through his hair, feeling the weight of the news crashing down on him. "A child, Maria. Our child. And they're using that to force me back into their world." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She took his hand in hers, squeezing it gently. "Luke, I'm sorry. I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to pull you back into their world. I wanted us to have a life on our own, free from all of this." Luke looked at her, his heart heavy with guilt. "No, Maria, it's not your fault. It's mine. I thought I could run away from everything. My family, the money, the expectations. But it's all come crashing down. I don't know what to do." The next few days were a blur of emotions. Luke and Maria spent long hours discussing what to do next. The news that they were going to be parents was both overwhelming and joyful, but it also brought with it a sense of inevitability. Luke couldn't deny the pull of his family's influence. His father's letter, the mention of their child, the pressure that hung in the air like a storm cloud. His mind kept returning to that moment, that terrible moment when he had read the letter. The weight of his father's words, the reminder that his legacy could still tie him back to the family's world, was like a chain pulling him in. But the more Luke thought about it, the more he realized one thing. He had to make a choice. A real choice. It wasn't just about rejecting the past anymore. It was about shaping the future. The next day, Luke drove Maria to the park, the same place where they had first talked about their hopes for the future. As they sat on a bench overlooking the vast cityscape, he took her hand in his and looked into her eyes. "Maria," he said softly, "I don't want our child to be born into a life of pressure, manipulation, and expectation. I want them to know the truth, to know the love that we've built, not some fake legacy that's been forced on me my whole life." Maria nodded, her expression unwavering. "I don't want that either, Luke. I want to raise our child in a world where love is real, not dictated by what our families think." Luke took a deep breath. "Then we do this together. We tell them, my family, the world, that we're going to live life on our terms. No more hiding, no more pretending." Maria smiled, a mixture of relief and determination in her eyes. "Together," she agreed. And in that moment, Luke knew. The shocking revelation of their pregnancy had thrown his world upside down, but it had also shown him the truth. He had a choice. He could return to the world that had always tried to define him, or he could build a new world with Maria, one where their love, their child, and their future came first. He didn't need his father's legacy. He didn't need the mansion or the money or the expectations. He needed Maria. He needed their child. And together, they would write their own story, one that had nothing to do with the past, but everything to do with the future. Luke stood up, pulling Maria into a gentle embrace, his heart filled with hope for what was to come. The future was uncertain, But for the first time in his life, Luke felt ready to face it. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever happened next, he wasn't alone. The phone call from his father was inevitable. Luke had known this moment was coming. He couldn't avoid the truth any longer. His father's message was short. "We need to talk. Meet me at the family estate tomorrow afternoon." The weight of the decision he had made with Maria, the choice to leave behind the life of wealth and legacy, had never felt heavier. But Luke knew one thing for sure. He couldn't go back. He had chosen Maria, and nothing would change that. At the family estate, Luke stood in front of his father, who wasted no time in getting to the point. "Maria is not the right woman for you." "And a child? You're throwing everything away." Luke stood his ground. "What matters now is Maria and our child. I don't need the empire. I don't need your legacy. What matters is love." His father's cold expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Luke. When you realize that, it will be too late." Luke's heart pounded, but his resolve was unshaken. "I've made my choice. I'll build a life with Maria, and if you can't accept that, then we're done." The drive back was quiet, but Luke felt lighter, knowing that he had chosen his own path. He arrived home to Maria, her warmth and love reminding him why he had walked away from everything. "I'm with you, Luke, always," she said. And in that moment, Luke knew they had everything they needed, each other. Nothing else mattered. As Luke and Maria's journey unfolded, one thing became clear. True happiness doesn't come from wealth or status, but from love and authenticity. Luke had everything: money, power, and influence. But it wasn't until he gave it all up for the chance at real love that he truly found peace. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most rewarding outcomes. Luke's story invites us to ask ourselves, are we living for what others expect of us? Or are we making choices that are true to who we are? What really matters to us in life? And how far are we willing to go for love and happiness? The greatest lesson from Luke's story is that love is priceless. It's not about the things we accumulate or the image we project. It's about the people we choose to share our lives with, the love we give and receive, and the courage to follow our hearts. Sometimes, the most valuable thing we can do is take a leap of faith, even when it means stepping away from everything we know. Do you think Luke made the right decision by leaving his family's legacy behind for love? Do you believe true happiness can only be found when we choose love over wealth? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. I'd love to hear your feedback. And on a scale from 1 to 10, how would you rate Luke's journey? Let's keep the conversation going. Thanks for watching.